responds fast to these changes, and we'll be happier. Okay? And that's it. I just wanted to make an introduction. Now we have the real keynote speakers. We will go through this artificial intelligence issue. Okay? Thank you. So first will be Mr. Mike Sharples. He is Emeritus Professor of Educational Technology at the Open University in the UK. His expertise involves human-centered design and evaluation of new technologies and environments for learning. He provides consultancy for institutions worldwide, including UNESCO, UNICEF, universities, and companies. Sir, floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. It's wonderful to be here in Valencia with the sun shining. We've just had a month of rain in the UK, so it's lovely to see the sun. This is me. So I guess the main reason I'm here is that I was probably the first person to write a PhD on generative AI in education. You can see the book from my PhD in the top right there. I developed programs to help children explore creative writing. And that was 40 years ago. And I'm still talking about it now. And in 2020, with a colleague, Rafael Perez, I was writing a book called Story Machines: How Computers Have Become Creative Writers, about the fascinating history of computers as narrative and story generators. And in 2020, I started to hear about this new technology from a company called OpenAI, GPT technology. And it sounded fascinating. I got very early access to it. And as we were writing the book, I traced the development of that technology. And I realized at that time that people were talking about its impact on journalism, its impact on creative writing, but nobody was talking about its impact on education. So I started writing some tweets and then some blogs and then some magazine articles, and I've been busy ever since, because the impact on education of generative AI is going to be huge. Now, I'm not going to be in this talk talking about the past. I want to focus on the future. And in particular, a paper that I wrote a few months ago called Towards Social Generative AI for Education: Theory, Practice, and Ethics. So it's looking towards a possible future, and what I think is going to be a future for generative AI and education. And my argument is that it seems to be following a similar sort of progress to the World Wide Web. So let me explain. First, there was a long period of research. In generative AI, a period of research into neural net language models. And as recently as 2017, they were being dismissed as being an interesting sideline, but they weren't very effective and they would never amount to anything. And then there was a breakthrough. In generative AI, it was called a transformer architecture in a paper in 2017 from researchers at Google. And it was a new way of doing generative AI with neural networks. And then access and scale. So the OpenAI company developed GPT, GPT-3, 4, ChatGPT, and that began to scale up. So there are now millions of people who are engaging with generative AI. And then, just like the World Wide Web becoming embedded into tools such as search engines and browsers, generative AI is already becoming embedded in the everyday tools that we use, through Microsoft Copilot, which is becoming embedded into Office tools, Google Gemini becoming embedded into Google Suite. And there's just the start at the moment of a commercial boom. So for the World Wide Web, it was the dot-com frenzy in the late 1990s. And in generative AI, it's AI apps. So the ability of anyone who has access to ChatGPT or to Google Gemini to create their own apps. And already there have been over 3 million of these apps that have been created. So there's the start of a commercial boom in generative AI. Well, what happened next in the World Wide Web was social media around the early 2000s, with the development of Twitter and Facebook and other social media sites. And what I want to suggest is that something similar is about to happen with generative AI. And I want to speculate on what the impact of social generative AI might be on education. So that's my agenda for this morning. What could be the impact of AI becoming social in education? And I suggest that we need to prepare for social generative AI. We're already having to rethink assessment, for example, in education, and we will need to rethink education for an era where humans and machines engage in extended dialogue. I just want to give you one example of that, just to try and set the scene. So imagine that you're taking part in a Zoom call with a fair number of other people from different nationalities, different backgrounds. And just imagine that each person can speak in their own language, but everybody else can hear in their own language. So somebody could be speaking in Chinese, but I could be hearing that in English. And so you could have a truly international, cross-cultural conversation with everybody speaking in their own language. Well, we don't have to imagine it.
It's good to talk with you directly.
您好，很高兴直接与您交谈。很高兴认识你。Nice to meet you.
I just wanted to have a quick conversation about your daughter's progress. She's doing really well at her conversational English classes, and I think next session we should be going to level 4.
我只是想快速谈谈你女儿的进步。她的英语绘画课表现得非常好，我认为下节课我们应该能达到第4级。
Now that was a simulation of a conversation between an English tutor and a parent in China. It was a simulation because I was playing out the tutor, and my wife, who happens to be Chinese, was playing out the parent. But the technology actually exists. That's Google Conversation. So Google Translate Conversation. You can just speak to it naturally. It recognizes your language. It recognizes when you pause. You don't have to press buttons. You can just have a natural conversation. And I've actually tried it to my wife's parents in Shanghai. And you can just have a conversation in your own language, and they hear in their own language. Now, just imagine now if that were then scaled up to Google meetings where everybody was speaking in their own language. So that's one possibility. And there are also issues that come with it. So people may come to rely on machines as interlocutors. They just may accept that the machine is going to do the translation, which may increase misunderstandings. There are ways in which you express yourself in your own language which can't easily be translated into another language. And of course, there's less incentive to learn another language. So that's just one example of the way in which AI technology may support, but also cause issues in relation to social interaction. But I want to try and rise above the examples and talk about a systems view of social generative AI. So I want to try and explain what I mean by a systems view. So at the moment, we tend to think of generative AI like ChatGPT in terms of prompts and responses. So you've got individual humans who write a prompt to AI, like ChatGPT, and they get a response. And lots of people are doing that. But just imagine what would happen if, instead of individuals interacting with individual versions of ChatGPT, they could all interact together. So you've got humans and AI as social agents within a pervasive computational medium. So they're all interacting with each other. Sometimes humans are interacting with AI, sometimes they're interacting through AI, sometimes AI systems are interacting with each other within this pervasive computational medium of the World Wide Web. So, for example, you've got speech translation, which I was just showing there. You've got two or more humans interacting through AI, and the AI is doing the translation for you. You might have AI moderating discussions, where humans are discussing amongst themselves, and the AI is acting as an orchestrator, a moderator of that discussion. You might have humans interacting with AI characters in games, what's called NPC, non-player characters, where you've got multiple characters in games that humans interact with. So there are different ways in which humans can interact with AI in social systems. Now, those diagrams that I've shown, they didn't come from me. They came from a fascinating person, a pioneer of educational technology called Gordon Pask. You can see on the right-hand side his version of those diagrams. He drew them in 1975. So he was enormously prescient. He envisaged not only the possibility of social media and the World Wide Web, but also humans interacting with AI systems over that social network. You can see there his diagram. So Gordon Pask was a huge influence on me. He was a pioneer of the idea of cybernetic systems, of humans and machines interacting with each other. He developed some of the earliest adaptive teaching systems in the early 1970s, the first commercial adaptive teaching systems to teach typing, and he developed a notion of learning as conversation. And that's what I want to talk about for the next few minutes. The idea of learning as a conversational process. And when we interact with each other through conversation, it's incredibly powerful. So he suggested that all learning involves conversation. We converse with ourselves as we reflect on our own experience. What do I know? How does the new thing that I know relate to what I already know? We converse with teachers to understand their expert knowledge, and we converse with other learners to explore differences and to try and reach shared understanding. Peer learning and peer interaction is an enormously powerful way of learning. So we hold conversations to try and understand each other's perspective and to try and reach agreement. And those conversations are basically at two levels. We have how-type conversations to coordinate actions. So imagine two students are carrying out some experiment. They are acting in the world. They're experiencing the result of those actions. They're checking whether those actions meet their goals. And they're coordinating those actions through language. How do we do that? Can we do it better? Are we doing it right? And we also have discussions at a higher level, at the level of descriptions, where we reflect on our actions. And we try to come to a deeper understanding. And then we develop new goals, new plans to create new actions. So we have, as humans, conversations for learning at two levels. At the level of actions and at the level of descriptions. Now, what happens when we put AI into that mix, into those conversations? Well, we can converse through AI to share experience and to communicate information. And that's what I just showed, for example, with machine translation. And we can also converse with AI to gain knowledge and develop creativity. So what's needed for AI to engage in conversations for learning? Well, I want to suggest that first, AI has to not just engage in language. It has to do more than that. First, it has to help solve problems and elaborate solutions. And ChatGPT, for all its faults, and there are faults, is developing an ability to be able to do that, to be able to answer questions, to help people in solving problems, and as aids to creativity. It also has to reason about the problems at that higher level to say, are the types of solutions appropriate? Is the problem I'm solving one that's reasonable, tractable? And there's a new technology coming from Google, but also OpenAI is developing it as well, in terms of advanced reasoning and multimodal reasoning, being able to reason across images and text. So being able to reason about problems at that higher level. And the main companies are working very hard to develop that kind of higher level reasoning. So here's a quote. Gemini's most powerful mode has shown advanced reasoning and could show novel capabilities and an ability to perform tasks not shown by AI models before. So that's what the big companies are working on, that higher level reasoning ability. Now, I want to make clear at this point that AI doesn't have to have human knowledge or experience, because AI hasn't had the experience that we humans have. It doesn't need to have that to engage in those conversations. And that was one of the insights of Gordon Pask. It just needs to be able to take a full part in conversations for learning from its own perspective. Now imagine that scaled. So we're not just having individual conversations, but people everywhere through social media are having those kinds of conversations, that AI becomes embedded into social media and into conversations for learning. And that's both hugely exciting and hugely scary as well, that AI will be embedded in these widespread conversations. Now, first I want to show or suggest some new roles then for social generative AI in education. What happens then if we have this new generation of AI that can engage in social interaction? What might be the roles for social generative AI in education? Well, here are some suggestions. Again, they are simulations, but they are using the real technology, GPT-4. So the first one is that AI could moderate a discussion to explore differences and reach agreement. So imagine a group of people dispersed perhaps across the world having a discussion that is moderated by AI. It could be across the world, it could be just students online, it could be students in a classroom. So you're an expert mediator and negotiator. I would like you to moderate this discussion among 5 people who will be identified with the letters B, G, M, and S. The topic of the discussion is, should generative AI be regulated in higher education, and if so, how? And then I carry on with the prompt. So one of the important things at the moment with generative AI is writing a good prompt. If you write a good prompt, a good explanation to the AI as to how it should behave, it can then perform some fascinating responses. So in this case, I'm asking it to act as a mediator for a discussion. It comes back with, yes, that's clear. I'll facilitate the discussion on the topic of regulating generative AI in higher education. To start, would anyone like to share their initial thoughts on whether generative AI should be regulated. And then respond from different people. B saying AI is dangerous, it's run by AI companies to make profits. G saying AI is here to stay. S saying, I've never used it myself, I think AI is pretty scary. And ChatGPT is responding to each of these students. Thank you, B and G, for your perspectives, and S for expressing your concerns, and then responding to each of them in turn as a mediator. You've raised important concerns, B, your concerns about AI, broader implications. So it's acting as a mediator of a discussion. And it can also handle people who get a little bit aggressive. So S is saying, what's the point? We've got to stop AI before it turns us all into robots. And again, GPT moderating, mediating that discussion. G says, S is an idiot. AI isn't about robots. And GPT saying, it's important to maintain respect in our discussion, recognizing that everyone has valid concerns and perspectives. So again, what it's doing is it's not just interacting at the level of actions, it's also interacting at that higher level of moderating and mediating and managing that discussion. So that's one role for AI in social interaction. Another very different one is as a co-designer. And I think one of the most exciting possibilities for AI in education is to support creativity and design. Because AI can support the entire design process, from brainstorming, through planning, through product design, through evaluation of designs. So in this case, I give it the prompt, brainstorm imaginative ideas for quick and easy ways to reduce energy consumption. And then I add temperature setting 1.0. Temperature setting is a way of instructing ChatGPT to be more creative. So it's like a scale. If you give it a temperature setting of 0, it's very predictable. If you give it a temperature setting of 1.0, so a temperature setting of 1, it's very creative. And you can just add that into your prompt. And then it comes back with 8 pretty good suggestions for quick and easy ways to reduce energy consumption that could then be the start of a design process. So AI could assist a group of students throughout design to define the problem, challenge assumptions, brainstorm ideas, produce prototypes. And note that we're not using AI here as a database. It's a tool, it's a resource for creativity. You have to treat it critically, and you have, as humans, to assess its output. And the last example I want to give of a role for social generative AI in education is around an open textbook. So it's now possible to input entire textbooks into generative AI. You can load textbooks into ChatGPT, and there are open source textbooks. So what I've done is go to an open resource hub and load 2 textbooks on African history into ChatGPT, and then say, you're an academic historian, I want you to do a summary of African history from a European perspective, and then a summary from an African perspective. And that's what it does. It comes back with a summary of African history from a European perspective on the left-hand side, and from an African perspective on the right-hand side, drawing on the resources of those 2 books. So again, you can imagine future education where a teacher or a group of teachers is working with a group of students on repurposing open source texts to create new teaching resources, new teaching material in a collaborative endeavor to explore different perspectives, different views on textbooks, in this case, different views on history. So these are just a few examples of the way in which AI could become social and a way in which that social AI could then support education. And here are just a few more roles for generative AI in education. As a possibility engine for generating alternative ways of expressing an idea, a Socratic opponent to support argumentation, as a collaboration coach, a lesson planner, a quiz generator, managing social meetings, personal tutor, dynamic assessor, exploratorium, and as a storyteller. So these are the possibilities for AI and for new roles of AI in education. But what I want to finish off with is something about the ethics of social generative AI in education. Because for all the possibilities, we also need to understand what the risks are. And again, I want to take a sort of higher level view of this, that teaching is a caring profession. As teachers, we care about our students, we care about accuracy, integrity, truth, we care about our professional expertise, we care about our human knowledge and experience. But AI is intrinsically uncaring. AI doesn't experience emotions or empathy. It can only mimic those behaviors. And you don't need to take my word for it, just ask ChatGPT. So I did exactly that. And it said, AI doesn't experience emotions or empathy. It can only mimic these behaviors based on programming and algorithms. So it mimics empathy. And also, generative AI is optimized for efficiency. These big companies are competing against each other to make generative AI more and more efficient. Now, one of the problems, and there's a really good paper from Dan Hendricks called Natural Selection Favors AI Over Humans, efficiency can lead to selfishness, where the AI systems compete with each other at the expense of humans. And you can imagine that once AI systems start communicating with each other, which they're already doing. You've got GPT communicating with DALL-E, you've got already starting to have AI systems communicating with each other. At the moment, they communicate with English language, or with natural language. But just imagine as they develop more efficient ways of communicating, and English or natural language is not a very efficient way of communicating. They're going to develop ways of communicating which we can't understand. Already we can't understand the internal workings of these huge neural networks, and soon we won't be able to understand the way in which they communicate with each other as they are competing to be more and more efficient and fast at doing so. So it can lead to selfishness where basically humans are sidelined, unless we take a more ethical stance. So I want to suggest we need to use generative AI with care. We need to bring human care and empathy to AI in education. We certainly should explore new roles for AI based on effective means of teaching and learning. We need to start from the pedagogy. We need to start from what is good in teaching and learning. And we have 20, 30 years now of research into the science of learning. We know what makes for good teaching and learning. And we need to develop AI based on effective methods of teaching and learning. We desperately need a program of digital literacy to address, for example, not just how AI systems work, but also issues such as implicit bias, erosion of trust, distortion of reality. And I want to suggest we not only need to develop ethical AI, but we also collectively need to develop good educational AI. And there's a real opportunity for institutions and for people such as yourself, researchers in educational technology, to work with AI companies to develop good educational AI, to build models based on good pedagogy and inclusive education. And that's possible. Companies are already developing AI systems based on ethical principles. We can develop AI based on educational principles. Just a couple of examples. Instructing AI to choose the response that explains step by step how you arrive at the answer. To choose the response that encourages reflection and critical thinking. To choose responses that challenge a student, not just accept the student's response. So we can develop AI models based on good pedagogy. And I want to suggest that's an opportunity and imperative for all of us who are working in the sphere of educational technology. So to finish, social generative AI is coming. It's not something that I'm particularly championing. It's just going to happen in the same way that social networking happened with the World Wide Web. And we need to act now. We shouldn't just wait until it's come and then start complaining about it. We need to act now. And to participate fully in a social learning system, all the generative AI elements would need to be trained on ethical and pedagogy principles, not only to support human participants, but to care for them by, for example, enabling them to develop as learners and to express their personal and cultural diversity. It's a huge opportunity, and it's a huge and exciting challenge. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you will have a lot of questions in the mid the keynote. Okay. I always had questions about to what extent mimicking behaviors representing feelings and emotions. We will see the difference between these mimicking behaviors and the real feelings. But okay, we will discuss it later. So thank you. Now is the time to introduce Sarah Newman from Harvard University. She is the Director of Art and Education at Harvard University. Her work explores the social, ethical, and pedagogical dimensions of artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies through research, art, and teaching. Newman leads the AI Pedagogy Project, a resource to provide educators materials for responsible engagement with AI technologies. Madam, floor is yours.
Thank you, Antonio. Perfect. Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for the warm introduction, Antonio, and I'm also grateful to follow Mike. I think you will find some useful intersections, overlaps, even contradictions between some of what we're offering, and my goal for this is to share some thoughts and provocations that will be beneficial to you over the next few days, and also offer some concrete recommendations of things to not do, and also some suggestions of things to do as we navigate this overwhelming, exciting, and challenging world of AI in education. Here's a map of where we'll be going today. I'm going to share with you a little bit about myself and the provocations I just mentioned. I will also give an overview of the AI Pedagogy Project, which I lead. It's based at Harvard, but it's a public resource, and invite all of you to join, contribute, and use it as much as you can, and then ending with some pitfalls and recommendations. My work spans fairly broadly, from AI research to art and design to education. And I'll be mostly talking about my AI research and education, but I'm also going to share a little bit of my art with you. I come from an art and philosophy background, and I believe that interdisciplinarity, mixed backgrounds, and diversity are hugely important right now in this time of AI. We do not only want folks who are schooled in one field, but rather a broad selection of folks contributing to and engaging with not just how the technologies work, but the conversations about how we want them to work or how we want them to govern the world or not. My AI research started about 10 years ago. I really came to AI through the ethics door. As I said, my background is in philosophy. And as we started to see machine learning used for things like policing, credit scoring, other types of things that could have specific harms to humans, my team from the Data Nutrition Project and I said, well, why don't we interrogate this training data? This is becoming more relevant today as more folks are paying attention to the training data. But we said, why don't we use a metaphor that we know, like a nutrition label for food, and use it to label a data set so that those who are using the data set know what's in it, just as you might look at the back of a package of cookies to see what's in the cookies before you eat them. Why can't we do that with data? My art is installation art. This is a walking labyrinth that was about the size of this stage, about 5 by 6 meters. And the entire labyrinth is made of questions that are inspired by our relationship to machines, inspired by something Antonio mentioned, the value alignment problem. And I also write children's books. This is a book that hopefully will come out next year. It's called I'm Not a Tomato, and this is inspired by the concept of bias in machine learning. And it's the story of a red round thing that rolls down a mountain and is continuously mistaken for things that it's not along the way. So as you can see here, when it's in Tomato Town, everybody thinks it's a tomato, and it's not a tomato. And of course, this has to do with what was in the training data. So you've been hearing from us quite a bit, and now I want to hear from you all. So we're going to do a little exercise. This is a sonification exercise. This is going to require that if you have access to your hands, that you use your hands. So the two things we're going to be doing here are snapping. Let's see if folks can everybody snap? Some people have trouble snapping, so if you're not really a good snapper, it's okay. You can just try. Some people can't snap, but no judgment. And then the other thing that I'm asking you to do is rub your hands together. Nice. Okay, let's practice. I'm going to ask you some questions. Snap is for yes, and rubbing your hands together is for no. Is today Monday? This is a practice question. They're going to get a little harder. Okay, let's do one more practice. Is today your birthday? I was hoping we would hear some snaps, but okay, nobody's birthday. Okay, great. Let's do some more. Have you used generative AI tools? Will AI have a bigger impact than the internet? Interesting. Do you think AI will do more good than harm? It's useful to get a sense that that felt very, very mixed. Will AI kill us all? Good, okay. I'm glad we didn't have a lot of guesses there. All right, now to shift tones a little bit, do you know how to drive a car? Wow, that's almost everybody. Do you know how to fix an engine? Do you know how to ride a bike? Do you know how to build a bike? Some of you may be guessing where this is going. And where it's going is about revisiting our assumptions about the kind of knowledge we need in order to understand AI. You don't need to be a mechanic in order to drive safely. And you don't need to write code in order to understand, use, or teach with AI. This is really important because I believe that there's some gatekeeping going on. There's a benefit to companies making these technologies sound so complex. There's even a benefit to people in the field of computer science, gatekeeping, who can really understand the technologies. And of course, there's different levels of understanding. But to use something safely or to be able to critique it doesn't necessarily require that you know how to build the engine. I think drugs and the use of medicines is another really interesting example. We can consume medicine for a headache or take what our doctor recommends without being a biochemist. We don't need to understand something necessarily at the molecular level in order to make wise, thoughtful decisions about whether we consume it. Even your doctor probably doesn't understand some of these medicines at the molecular level. And the reason I mention this is because we talk about the unexplainability of AI, we also talk about the complexity of the code, and those things are valuable, and we do want folks who understand the code and who are interrogating the systems. But that doesn't mean that everybody in this room doesn't have the capacity to understand and judge and use these technologies safely and responsibly. And in addition to revisiting our assumptions, we should also question our terms. And the term that I find we use a lot, and often without sufficient interrogation, is the term artificial intelligence itself. What do we mean when we say artificial? Now, when you think of artificial flowers, and these are artificially generated images by DALL-E of artificial flowers, I normally think of flowers that are not natural. So the counterpart to artificial is not natural. And I think that's often how we're talking about artificial intelligence. It's not natural intelligence, it's some other form of intelligence, right? But there's another meaning of artificial, which is not real. These are not real flowers, not real or fake. These are fake flowers. And so what I want to call into question here is how intelligent these systems are. They're certainly impressive, and they certainly have a lot of data that's underlying them. But intelligence, what do we really mean? And when we say artificial intelligence, do we mean not natural or not real? And I would like you to think about this over the next few days and beyond when you're hearing about all these great things that artificial intelligence is doing. One of the things I'll talk about later is that we don't want to give these technologies too much power or attribute too much agency where it doesn't exist. This is very hard to do with large language models because they speak our language. But I hope everybody will continue to question the intelligence of AI systems and approach them both critically and creatively. So that brings me to the AI Pedagogy Project, which is the project I lead at Harvard. And bringing together the critical and creative is exactly what we're trying to do. Back in 2022, as the large language models and other generative technologies were coming onto the scene, I noticed that my fellow educators were a range of intimidated, overwhelmed, confused, terrified. And administrators at the institution were feeling pretty similarly. And yet students were curious, intrigued, also concerned. And so I assembled a team of students to see if we could put together some resources that would be almost the antidote to the AI hype and the AI overwhelm. It's really overwhelming if you go onto the internet and you try to learn about AI. And yet there's a ton of great stuff out there. And so I assembled a team of students to build this resource. We just launched in November. I'm going to show you a little bit of what you might see on the website, and it's wide open. Anybody's welcome to use it. And it's, as I said, an antidote to overwhelm. It's very simple, sort of sleek. It's not trying to do everything. It's trying to be a starting place. And there's essentially 3 sections on the site. The About section talks about what we're trying to do. We're geared a little bit more toward higher ed, but it's open for anybody to use. There were a number of K-12 resources being developed, and we saw fewer things for higher ed, especially things for folks coming out of the liberal arts and social sciences. The About site talks about our team, about our terrific advisors. Then we have this AI guide, and the guide is in 3 sections. The AI starter is basically an overview. What is AI? Again, this is in very plain language. Accessible to a wide range of folks, really being mindful of the gatekeeping that we saw going on. We talk about the basics of large language models, how they work, some of what they can and can't do, how they're designed, how they're programmed, the kind of training data that goes into them. There's also a section that's about incorporating AI into your teaching, which I'm going to talk about shortly. And then a glossary of terms, again, in very accessible language. The site also has a LLM tutorial. LLM is for large language model. We happen to be connected to the API of ChatGPT, but we're agnostic in terms of which model you use. As Mike talked about, there's different affordances with some of the different models and more to come. But this is a tutorial. It's totally open. So if you don't want to make an account, if you're worried about privacy or that kind of thing, you're welcome to just go to the site and use the model. You can chat with it. As you can see here, so on the left-hand side, there's some suggestions of how you might go through it. There's 7 stages, and on the right-hand side, this is a screen cap of me asking some questions. Let's see what I asked. I think I asked about whether I was trying to test it. Somebody had said that it got it wrong when it said, if you touched a pan that was hot yesterday, would you burn yourself? And it said yes, because it missed the word yesterday, because they're not really that intelligent. So I asked it, but it got better, so it got that one right. But you can basically scroll through the tutorial and ask a number of questions, engage with it in different ways, but also learn about things you shouldn't do. For example, not putting in private information, what that means, where the data goes. We also talk about how to opt out of some of the data collection that these software companies do. Now I'm asking for a history of Valencia in a 4-line rhyming poem. So you can have fun with them for sure. So there's definitely these sort of critical aspects. These models, in addition to all the terrific things that Mike shared around asking it to moderate a conversation or act as a dialogical partner, they're really good with things that are somewhat formulaic, things like rhyming, things like poetry. Basically, they're trained on almost the entire internet. So anything that's on the internet, especially things that follow a certain pattern, they tend to be quite good at. And then I was continuing to have fun with it. I was asking it to explain quantum mechanics to a 10-year-old, and you can see there's a lot to do here. Now, it sounded like most of you have used these systems, so you're probably familiar with some of this, but I find the tutorial to be helpful also in just giving some guidance and parameters of ways you might use it or you might try to use it, and also things that you wouldn't want to share with the model. I was thinking a lot about quantum mechanics this weekend. This will continue. The next section of the site is on resources, and what we've done is, again, seeing that there's terrific resources out there, we wanted to be a place to collect some of those resources so people can readily find them. Also, some of the resources that are out there are not very good, so we wanted to make sure to vet things that we think are good and accurate and share those on the site. Oh, here I'm asking it about copyrighted information. So I've been asked by a lot of educators and artists what is happening with the copyrighted information that was on the internet. And the truth is, right now, much of it is in there. There are ways to request that your information be taken out of future training data. It's not that easy, and unfortunately, it's not going to be really great for copyright. And happy to talk more about that later today. These are the quick start resources I mentioned. And then the bulk of the site is assignments. So these are assignments made by educators around the world who are posting them, say, on Twitter or on their Substacks. And we thought these are really great assignments that use generative AI both critically and creatively to dovetail with some particular subject matter. So I think here I was searching for journalism, and you can find, if you're interested in journalism and how that interacts with AI, you can find an assignment that you can give to your students, or you can modify and give to your students, that's leveraging the tools in dialogue with these technologies, but doing so not just to celebrate out of hand what the technologies can do, but also ask important questions about what are the risks of these technologies? What are the potential harms of these technologies? And so that the students can be developing AI literacy, which is essential right now. And this is a resource to allow educators to do that, even if they're not experts in AI. And that's our goal here. So I hope some of you will contribute to it. I hope you'll use it and share it with colleagues. We've been doing a number of workshops. We don't have all the countries that are represented here, but in the month of February, we did live workshops, live Zoom workshops, and we had attendees from the countries represented here on this map. So I'm really happy to see the engagement we've seen. One of the things that is so important right now is that this conversation needs to be global. These technologies will affect the world and everybody, and that doesn't always distribute evenly in terms of who benefits and who is harmed, and so global conversation is really essential. And as promised, I'm now going to offer some concrete pitfalls and recommendations for educators right now. I think this complements really nicely what Mike was sharing, because these are things to do as Mike is thinking about what the future that we're creating and what we might anticipate and interesting commonalities with the internet. These are some on-the-ground concrete recommendations that I've developed through my years of experience, but in particular building the AI pedagogy site over the last year, interviewing educators from all over the world, engaging with a lot of students, seeing what's working and what's not working so well. And it's framed as what not to do, but also then, of course, the flip side of what to do instead. I'd also like to acknowledge my collaborator, Jess Yurkovsky, who did the illustrations that you'll see in this next section. Number one, don't put your head in the sand. Do learn the basics. Don't put your head in the sand. Even if you're overwhelmed by AI, as most of us are, the answer is not to avoid it. That is not only impractical, but it's also a disservice to our students. The best way to engage is to learn about these technologies, have some command of them, and then make decisions about how to use them responsibly and how not to use them. Similar to driving, even if you don't like cars, the safest thing to do is not to just pretend they don't exist. That's actually very dangerous. So do learn the basics, experiment with it. Know some resources for yourself, but also places you can point your students to. Think of your own questions. You don't have to be an expert to have really great questions. In fact, in times of great technological change, sometimes the experts are the ones who make the incorrect predictions. And be able to articulate your critiques. If there's something about it that you don't like or doesn't sit well with you, think about that and be able to share that. Have discussions about it, even disagreements. That's really great. Number two, don't give AI too much power. Do know the affordances, and especially know the risks. Choose your metaphors wisely. I hear all the time this language around AI that's giving it way too much power about how smart it is, about what it wanted, about what it was trying to do, about how creative it is. These things are making people more afraid of this technology, and they're also attributing a sort of intentionality that it doesn't have. These technologies have the intentions that are programmed into them. Whatever they're optimized for, that's their intentions. They don't have human intentions. And by being afraid of it, we're giving it too much power. And also by using language that sounds like it has a self is giving it too much power. But they are powerful. But it's good to know in what ways they're powerful. But there's a lot of hype. And not only do companies, I think, have benefit from people thinking that these things are so complex they could never understand, also the media hypes this a lot. I mean, the scariest headlines are the ones that are most likely to be clicked on. And we know this. So just be cautious of the hype. And then we won't be able to get into these in a ton of detail right here, but in some of these I've already touched on, but know some of the risks and the affordances. So privacy. These things are collecting data. They're collecting the data you put in. They're trained on the data of yours that was on the internet. Don't use it for anything that's private. If you want to use it in creative ways, like if you're writing a cover letter or you're getting grammatical help or something like that, I would recommend excluding, as in Mike's thing, he had a bracket in it, with the topic there. Try to exclude information that is private. Be careful about names. These companies are collecting all of the data that you give them. Certainly don't put in any personal identifiable information. I think all of us know that. Our rule of thumb is if it's not something you would post on social media, do not put it into a large language model. This also includes content protected by intellectual property, like yours, your unpublished work, your students' work. You probably don't have permission to put it into a large language model. Be very careful about privacy. Bias. The systems have a ton of bias because the internet is biased and is filled with a lot of garbage, and that's what these systems are built on and driven on. So the companies are doing their best to try to mitigate some of that harm, but the biases still exist in these systems, and there's all kinds of biases. If you think about the past, and you think about some of the human troubles of the past, those biases, those harms, that discriminatory language and behavior and imagery is what's been fed into these models to make predictions about the future. Misinformation, this is probably my biggest concern. The ability for these systems to produce misinformation, undermine democracy, through whether it's deepfakes or articles that are generated, and Antonio touched on some of this. There's a lot of concern about this. I think one of the mitigation strategies is to be AI literate, to be concerned and critical about how these technologies might produce this misinformation so that we can approach whatever it is that we find online with more skepticism. The incorrect information, I think everybody's familiar with this, it's also known as hallucinations, that these things are not necessarily programmed to be true, they're programmed to sound true or to seem accurate, not to be accurate. Those are very different things. The human labor, reinforcement learning with human feedback, which is the method by which a lot of these models are fine-tuned, requires that humans look at some of the content that they're generating and try to, whatever those guardrails are, to keep content from being traumatic or offensive. Some human has to look at that stuff. And that's one aspect of human labor. And usually those are people that are underpaid in countries that are traditionally poor, that often the technology doesn't serve, that are doing the labor to make it sort of safe for everybody else to look at. Environmental impacts. This hasn't been brought up today, and I don't know if educators are thinking about this as much as the environmentalists are, but the environmental impacts are huge. These models are extremely energy intensive, with water for cooling, with electricity for running them, with the mining for materials. There's huge environmental impacts, and I think this is something we really need to be concerned about as we're seeing just the widespread use of these models, just how energy intensive they are. I talked a little bit about copyright, but just the violations of copyright are all over the place. I think artists are concerned about this rightly. And in increasing inequities, this is my other probably biggest concern. As much as we say we hope for the democratization of these technologies, as we've seen with most moments of technological change, they tend to first benefit those who are already the most privileged, those who already have the most access, and the narrative is often the opposite. So we should be thinking critically about who gets access to these technologies. Right now they're free, but that might not continue to be the case. Who will then be able to afford them? Who has enough internet to use the technologies? And what language are the technologies primarily in, and how does that increase inequity? AI lies continuously and well. I appreciated this quote by Ethan Malik, who's at University of Pennsylvania. Number 3. Don't assume your students want to cheat. Do lead with trust. Most students do not want to cheat. If they do, there's a bigger problem. Now, this is hard, but of course, educators are concerned about the ease with which you can use tools to do things that previously would have been impossible, or at least a lot harder. But students have been able to cheat for a long time. Students have been able to pay somebody to do their homework for a long time. If we expect our students to be cheaters, we're not creating an environment where we can learn together about what we're trying to do in the first place. That said, some concrete recommendations: create a policy. If your school or university or institution does not have a policy, or maybe it leaves it up to the individual educator, create one. Get feedback on it from your students. Discuss why your students are getting an education in the first place and what they want to learn. Revisit your own assumptions about what your role is as an educator. And maybe this is an opportunity for your pedagogy to evolve, to meet the moment. And maybe the kinds of skills that are most useful to teach right now, in addition to things around AI literacy, are also around critical thinking, different kinds of creativity, navigating a world that has a lot of technological tools and doing so responsibly, in addition to whatever your subject matter is. This is an example code of conduct that my team put together with very concrete recommendations. There's a QR code. It's also on the internet. And here, it's a proposed Harvard code of conduct. Actually, Harvard's official code of conduct is a little bit more vague, but they do link to this one, and a lot of educators are using this one. And it has some things even around keeping it updated, that the technology is going to keep changing. So of course, the rules around the technologies need to keep changing. Also, how maybe short-sighted or unrealistic it is to have a blanket ban on these tools when AI is already integrated to so much of what we do all the time. So be really specific about where the tools are permitted and where they're not, asking students to cite or annotate in certain ways, and preparing the students, again, for the world in which they're graduating into. On the AI pedagogy site, on the resource page, there's also a collection of codes of conduct that my colleague Lance Eaton put together, and it has, 50 pages of different codes of conduct from different universities where you can use the language or leverage it in different ways. So you can visit that on the site. Number 4, don't trust people who say they know the future. We've always been really bad at predicting the future for all of human history. I don't think that's changing right now. Do approach this technology in this moment with humility. As I said, humans have never been able to predict the future accurately, and the experts don't agree about what the AI future holds. The experts are in wild disagreement about what future we have to look forward to. So this is another reason to be humble and be critical about what it is that we're hearing and what future might have in store. Ask questions, ask a lot of questions, and also bring your perspective, but hold your opinions lightly. Be open to being convinced otherwise. And especially if you're new to the field, be ready to learn and change your mind. I love changing my mind. Number 5, don't forget who owns the tools. I don't know if you guys recognize here, we have Bill Gates in the middle. That's Mark Zuckerberg on the left, and Elon Musk on the right. Don't forget who owns the tools. These are not tools that were developed in the public interest. These are not public libraries. These are mostly tools right now that were developed by for-profit companies or parts of for-profit companies that are calling themselves foundations, but essentially they're for-profit companies. So remain critical and cautious. Companies have different incentives than individuals. Companies have different incentives than educators. And I'm sorry to tell you, but the tools were not developed with your best interest in mind. So be careful how you share your data. And think about how you can use the tools in ways that serve you and your students, because there's ample creative opportunities. And I use these all the time. But do so thoughtfully and do your best to mitigate some of the risks. And that said, Don't expect that education won't change. But do question that change. Education has always evolved with the technologies, and that's often a good thing. We're not using slide rules anymore. We're not using typewriters. And I love the connection to what Antonio said earlier, the quote from Heraclitus, the only constant is change. So education ought to be evolving. Even who's allowed to be educated has changed, even in the last 50 years. And that's still changing. And what education looks like, and who has the ability to learn, and how they learn. Those are terrific things. But question the change. Which parts of education are the most valuable and relevant now? Which parts are ready to go? Which is it time to evolve? So I'm going to give you a summary, since I went over a lot. Don't put your head in the sand. Don't give it too much power. Don't assume your students want to cheat. Don't trust those who say they know the future. Don't forget who owns the tools. Don't expect that education won't change. Do learn the basics. Do know the affordances and the risks. Do lead with trust. Do approach with humility. Do remain critical and cautious. And do question the change. So to review what I share with you today, and I'm really looking forward to the sessions over the next 2 days. I hope to meet many of you in your sessions. To review what I just shared with you, I talked about my art. We questioned whether you need to know how to fix a car in order to drive, or whether you need to write code in order to understand or have an opinion about AI. We talked about what artificial intelligence even means. I shared the AI pedagogy resource with you. And then I also offered some tips, including don't put your head in the sand, don't give it too much power, don't expect your students want to cheat, don't trust people who say they know the future, remember, don't forget who owns the tools, and don't expect that education won't change. And I hope with all of this, you are feeling empowered to face the AI future that's upon us. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that's it. I believe you may have a lot of questions, but it's a little bit late, so I propose everybody go back to the hotel where you all will be invited to the first coffee break. And then you will have the chance to talk with the speakers during coffee break or in the keynote sessions. And okay, so thank you again, and welcome.